Okay, here we are. It is 7 p.m. Sunday. Sunday. For those of you, well, some of you probably had your own local variations. For those of you who don't know, if you run into anybody from my neck of the woods, part of the world I live in, and you say, Sunday, they'll know that you're referring to the Fremont Raceway commercials that used to be absolutely ubiquitous when I was growing up. And it was always, stock cars and hot rods and funny cars and all that stuff. Anyway, doesn't matter. Just another little bit of ephemera from the fading Williams brain. Hello. Excuse me. Good evening. It is 7 p.m., 7:01 p.m. California time. I'm Tad. I will be here for about the next hour. And I will be reading. And for those of you who missed the transition, which was much more abrupt than I intended it to be, I set aside the very last bit because it was already, some minutes after when I usually finish, of the previous Bobby Dollar novel of Dirty Streets of Heaven. And when I came back to it last night, or early this morning, I realized it was only 7 pages. And that only takes me 10 or 15 minutes. So rather than hanging up the whole program, I just started on the next Bobby Dollar book, which several people had mentioned that they would be happy to hear. So that is what I am reading from. And I read through what I would call sort of like, I guess the prologue, the whatever you want to call it. I don't know if you can hear in the background that idiot dog of ours, our new idiot dog, as opposed to our old idiot dog, is barking up there. That sounds fairly normal, but she makes a lot of really weird noises. I had never realized quite how complicated the vocal apparatus of an American bully was. She makes the weirdest noises. Right now, she's just barking at something, probably pizza delivery. But when we put her in her crate for the night to go to bed, when she's unhappy, she'll be lying there going, I mean, these like weird, like Scooby-Doo on acid. They're very strange noises. Anyway, so I am currently have started and am now going to continue with Happy Hour in Hell. It was sort of a spur of the moment decision. I had several possibilities of things to read through, but that one seemed the easiest because people at least wouldn't have to be brought up to date on every single thing happening in it, since it basically continues on from the end of the previous book. So Happy Hour in Hell is the thing. Life here is lifelike, as always. No complaints. I thought we were going to have a wretched, rainy kind of weekend, and instead it's been pretty nice. So no complaints, especially since we have a dog who refuses to come in. Johnny is still hanging out most of the time in the backyard, although he is very happy to come in when Lemon has been put in her crate for the night. And then he comes in and finishes off all the chews that she has already softened up for him. Because as strong as Johnny's jaws are, he's part Mastiff. Lemon's are stronger. That dog could crack coconuts with those jaws. It's amazing. And we are just all very glad that neither of them are biters, although Lemon does have an annoying propensity for chewing things, which we discovered after we lost. Not after we lost, but we have discovered because we have lost 2 remotes, 1 earbud, the corner of the couch, which Deb says she's going to repair. And I said, good luck. And several other objects of various kinds, which fortunately most of them weren't worth much. But and occasional forays into Deb's knitting basket or bag or whatever she's carrying her stuff around with her. So that's always entertaining. And using the word entertaining in its Chinese definition, as in, may you live in interesting times, being an old Chinese curse. Okay, so what else is there? So I'm working on Splintered Sun, as I mentioned last night or early this morning. I'm doing a lot of backfilling of lore, I guess, for lack of a better word. I am spreading the canon. That's with 1 N, and or actually 2 N's, but not 3 N's, I guess I should say. CANON. And I am enjoying that. That's actually a lot more fun than writing, although writing will have to resume very soon now. And of course, just taking the time to work on other ideas and things, and of course plan the writings of Splintered Sun when I return to it in the next week or so. And let me think. Anything else? No, not really. Not really. Lots of things going on, of course, but this being a show that is pretty much just about reading and occasionally me maundering on about things that are happening in our life. I'm not going to cover any of those other topics, as central as they may be to my concerns. And I will, in fact, get on with the reading. So before I do, let me just check in and see who has showed up. And I see Becca. Hello, Becca. Oh, and there's Sherry. I haven't seen Sherry. Hello, Sherry. I haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. Ray Weatherford. Welcome, Ray. Good to have you, as always. There's Becca. Um, and there's Isaac. Isaac says, we had a super loud thunderstorm. I'd almost, yeah, I kind of like those sort of things. I mean, I don't like them when I have a dog outside, or as in a famous family story, when I have a cat stuck up in a tree. Um, we used to have a cat. He was a lovely cat. He was an Abyssinian. So he had he had that kind of Siamese shape, that kind of Siamese look, except he was reddish brown. He was a beautiful cat. But he was nuts. He was absolutely nuts. And I realize the cat owners out there will go like, hold my beer. But yeah, he genuinely was nuts. And whenever he would get out of the house into the backyard, he would immediately run up a tree or a telephone pole or an electrical power pole and not be able to get back down again, which was, a bit upsetting. And there was this one time he went all the way up to the top of, this was in our first house in California, which we were renting. And he ran up to the top of this very tall tree. I don't remember what it was. It was probably some kind of evergreen. And I was up or out in the backyard for hours trying to get him to come back down, and he wouldn't or couldn't or whatever. And as a result, finally, like that night, it got dark and I just had to give up. I couldn't get him down. I couldn't think of what else to do. The fire department and other people said, we don't do that. That's kind of an old-fashioned idea. We don't come out and get cats out of trees. So I had no other option really except just to give up and go in. And anyway, that night a storm came in. And there was Riley stuck up in this like 60-foot tall tree, and we're lying there and the wind is blowing hard, and we're lying there and we can hear Riley being blown back and forth in this gigantic tree, and the Doppler effect of him going every time the tree went back and forth over the roof. Anyway, I eventually got him down by climbing. The next day, I got up and climbed onto the roof with a gigantic screen door. And of course, it was still very windy, but I'd taken the screen door off, and I was holding it out for him to jump onto from the top of from where he had come partway down the tree. And of course, I'm standing and it's a howling gale. I mean, it was daytime this time, but it's a howling gale. And I'm standing there with this giant screen door in my hand, trying not to get blown off the roof down 20 feet onto the concrete patio below me. And meanwhile, Riley is like starting to step out and then jumping back and jumping back. And meanwhile, I'm like, whoa, I mean, I don't really blame him. It didn't look very safe. It sure as hell wasn't safe for me. But anyway, as somebody once said to us, which is only partially true, but mostly true, said, I've never found a cat skeleton at the base of a tree. Actually, we had one friend who said she had found a cat skeleton at the base of a tree. But fortunately, I don't think we'd met her yet at that point. Anyway, I finally got him onto the screen and leaned way out, got down on my knees, and sort of, as I recall, dropped the screen down to the ground with him on it. And of course the air kept it from going down too quickly, and he was fine, and he was recaptured and brought back into the house and made much of, despite the fact that he was a complete idiot. It caused us a huge amount of worry the night before. Anyway, sorry, got off onto that topic. But so I generally like storms. I like the crash and bang of them. I like the winds, but I have forever lived with animals who are a problem when storms come. And of course, we haven't been able to enjoy a storm properly since we got Johnny 11 years ago, or whenever it was, 12, 13 years ago now, because Johnny is terrified of wind and rain, God forbid, thunder or lightning. which fortunately are fairly infrequent, but that will just send him into the closet, scratching and scraping and trying to dig his way down to Moria. I don't know. So I haven't been able to enjoy a storm for a while. But anyway, so what I was doing here, before I got distracted, I wanted to say hello to the folks that were here. And I see Beth is here, Beth Keller. Hello, Beth. I see Trish Laubacker. Hello, hello. Isaac said, yes, they did, in fact, have 2 spooked kitties. Justin Balance, hello. Good to see you. Welcome. Nice to have you. Jay Sheckley, my buddy. Jay says, Riley. Oh, yeah. Oh, dear. Trish says I freaked out their cat Loki with my Doppler cat noise. Melissa, hello. Lovely to have you with us. Bum, 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 bum. Who else is here? Oh, Mark Craigbaum. Hello, Mark. Ivan. Hello, buddy. Good to see you. And Isaac. Oh, I missed that part. You have a terrible cold. I am sorry to hear that. And Emily. Hello. Tad, there's some sort of unholy dinosaur situation. Never mind. You know, it's cats and dinosaurs, of course. A well-known. It's one of those things they make nature documentaries about, the struggles between cats and dinosaurs, which are, permanent and always make good TV. As you can see, the bed is a bit rumpled. We've had a number of cat-related issues today. Somebody, I'm assuming it was my daughter, our daughter, whose cats these technically are, despite the fact that most of the time I seem to be taking care of them. I think she came down and poured the last of the cat litter onto the top of the pre-existing cat litter, and now there is no cat litter. So the cats are looking at. I'd already put the plastic cover on the litter tray and all that, and I was looking around and realized there is no cat litter. There's no cat litter anywhere. It's all gone now, and I didn't even have a chance to go out and get any. So as a result, I went out. You can't see it from anywhere here, or I'd show you. But we had a huge pile of wood mulch from when we had our trees last trimmed, and a bunch of them cut down, the ones that were troublesome in one way or another. For those of you worrying about that, do not worry. Our house is literally surrounded by several acres of trees, and we leave them all alone unless they are a danger to other trees. That's the only reason they come down. They're the ones around. There's a big kind of circle of open space around our house, so we're not particularly worried about them falling on us, but we don't want them taking out a bunch of other trees or taking out, the electrical lines, which happens up here in the hills all the time. So we had several of them cut down and then chopped it into mulch. And so I went out and got a big tray full of mulch and brought it back in and put it there instead. And they're still looking at it like, what the hell is this? Is he crazy? Has he lost his mind finally? I mean, he's always been unstable, but good God, this is like wood. This is wood and leaves and dirt. No self-respecting cat is going to poop in the leaves and the dirt. So we'll see if I can hold them off until I can get to the store and buy more cat litter. Okay, now you've heard enough disgusting details about the animals in this family. I think I've said hello to many of the people who are here. If not, I apologize if I missed you. I'll try and catch you later in the reading. I am going to go back to read the book now. So we are in Happy Hour in Hell. In the prologue concerned Bobby crossing the Neronian Bridge, which actually has some significance later on, so I'll remind you of it. It's the Neronian Bridge. It's called that because it was put up in honor of Nero, Emperor Nero, one of the bad emperors of Rome, coming to hell after he died. So there's a little teeny biography bit about Nero and about how when he got to the bridge and got halfway across, his supposed royal retinue all vanished, and he was left to face his mother, who he murdered, and the demon who had arranged the whole thing for him. And so that's all we know about the Neronian Bridge. But Bobby walked across the immense length of this Neronian Bridge for hours and hours and hours and hours, made his way through some weird, crusty things, human-shaped things that turn out to be purgatorial souls who think they actually belong in hell and are trying to get in, although they never can. And then we went back to the so-called real world, where various things happen, and we learn how Bobby is still just completely hung up on Kaz and is just desperate to get her back somehow. So that's where we are. So chapter 1, pillow talk. We only had one night together, really, and I remember every moment of it. So, what's it like living in hell? Oh, it's great. We drink ice cream sodas all day and play pool and smoke cigars and never ever turn into donkeys. That sounds more like Pleasure Island from Pinocchio. Shoot, you got me. Come on, woman, it was a serious question. Well, maybe I don't want to answer it, Wings. How's that for serious? We were both naked in Kaz's secret hideaway and had just made love for the first, well, technically first, second, and second and a half time. Her head was on my chest. I stroked her hair, gold so pale you could only tell it wasn't white in direct sunlight. That bad, huh? Oh, you beautiful, stupid man, you can't imagine. She lifted herself on one elbow so she could look me in the face. She was so gorgeous that I promptly forgot what we were talking about and lay there staring like I was brain damaged. By any normal standards, I must have been, because otherwise, why would a minion of heaven be making naked squishies with a tool of Satan in the first place? Not just bad, she told me. Worse than you could possibly imagine. I kept wondering how anyone, even the lords of hell, could want to harm that radiant beauty. The official version would be that she had a face like a Renaissance angel, beautiful, delicate, full of lofty thoughts. But the truth was that she looked like the most innocently wicked graduate of a very, very expensive private school. If I hadn't known for a fact that Kaz had been around since before Columbus sailed, I'd have been feeling very, very guilty after all the things we'd just done. I was beginning to believe I was in love with this woman, but of course she wasn't actually a woman at all, and she came from hell. Think about that a little, and you'll probably understand why I didn't want to consider our situation too closely. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. No, thank your lucky stars that you don't know, Bobby. I want you to stay that way. I don't want you ever to know what that place is like. And then she suddenly hugged me so tightly that for a moment I thought she was trying to crawl through me somehow and out the other side. Her small, hard body seemed both the most real and the most vulnerable thing in the world. I won't let you go back, I said. I thought she laughed. I only realized later that the noise had been something else, something far less simple. Of course you won't, Bobby, she said. We'll never go back, either of us. We'll stay here and drink ice cream sodas forever. So kiss me, you dumb fuck angel. Have you ever had somebody you loved die on you? All that stuff you feel and you're still feeling it, but they're just gone? You carry that around with you every moment, all the things you failed to tell them, all the ways you were stupid, all the ways you're missing them. It feels like holding up a huge collapsing wall, as if you were some hero in a movie waiting for everyone to get to safety, but you already know you're not going to get away yourself, that eventually the weight will just crush you. Ever had somebody leave you and tell you they never really loved you? That you're a loser, a waste of time they should have known to avoid? You carry that one around too, but instead of an insupportable weight, it's more like a horrible burn. Nerve endings fried and stuck on jangling alert. A pain that occasionally subsides to a bitter, itching ache, but then flares up into agony again without warning. Here's one more. Ever had somebody steal the thing that mattered most to you, then laugh in your face about it? Leave you helpless and seething? Okay. Now imagine that all three things happened at the same time with the same woman. Her name was Kaz, short for Casimira, also known as the Countess of Cold Hands, a she-demon of high standing and about the most mesmerizing creature I'd ever seen. When we met, we were on opposite sides in the ancient conflict between heaven and hell. We became lovers, which both of us knew was an extremely stupid, supremely dangerous thing to do. But something drew us together, although that's a pretty damn bland, vanilla way of putting it. We made sparks. No, a raging fire, and it still blazed inside of me long after she'd gone. Some days it seemed like it was going to burn me to ashes. Kaz belonged to Eligor, one of the Grand Dukes of Hell. After our affair, our fling, whatever you'd want to call it, she went back to him. She even tried to make me think she'd never cared about me, but see, I didn't believe that. I was certain that she felt something too, because if not, then I was wrong about everything. I'm talking about up is down, black is white, the world is really flat after all kind of wrong. Call me stupid if you want, but I wouldn't believe that. I couldn't. Besides, I had a more practical reason for thinking that she really cared for me. Don't worry, we're coming to that soon. Anyway, now Eligor hated me because I'd messed with his property. Also because of some other stuff like shooting his secretary, getting his bodyguard eaten, and generally interfering with his plans. The power imbalance between us was ridiculously skewed in Eligor's favor. He was infernal royalty, and I was a minor mid-level functionary who already had a bit of a negative reputation with my superiors. So why wasn't I dead? Because I had the feather. A golden feather from the wing of an important angel that marked an illicit bargain made between Grand Duke Eligor and someone in heaven, whose identity I still didn't know. Eligor definitely didn't want that feather going public, and as long as I had it stashed safely away, I felt sure he would leave me alone. On the other hand, Eligor had Kaz, and he'd taken her back to hell, far out of my reach. Stalemate. At least that's what I'd thought when the whole thing started. As it turned out, I had built a house of cards out of the flimsiest set of assumptions possible. Oops. Getting ahead of myself a little. A lot of things happened before I even heard of the Neronian Bridge, and I should probably tell you about some of them before we return to hell. The latest episode of the ongoing craziness that is my afterlife started with what normal folk would call a job review. Except normal folk wouldn't be reviewed by a group of pissed-off celestials who could literally destroy an immortal soul with a single word. Even the poor bastards who work for Trump don't have to put up with that. Chapter 2. 5 Angry Angels. I'd been called to heaven, specifically to the Enactoron, the great council chamber I had visited once before, an astounding architectural impossibility with cloud-high ceilings, a floating table of black stone, and a river running right through the middle of the floor. My archangel, Temuel, sort of my supervisor, brought me into the mighty building and then discreetly retired. Floating on the far side of the stone table, as if someone had jerked away a candelabrum and left the candle flames burning in midair, were the ephors, my 5 special inquisitors. God loves you, Angel Deloriel, declared the filmy white flame that was Terentia. This ephorate welcomes you. Like the first time I'd met them, Terentia seemed to be the one in charge, although I knew that Cariel, the warrior angel beside her, was about as high as anyone can get in the hierarchy of the third sphere. Everything to do with Earth and its inhabitants. Beside him hovered Chamuel, a mist that gleamed from within, and next to Chamuel, I guess it's Camuel, anyway, C-H. Camuel, a mist that gleamed from within, and next to Camuel was Anaita, a childlike presence that I knew from unpleasant experience could be as coldly formal as Terentia. At the edge of the group was Raziel, a being of dim red light who is neither male nor female. All of these important angels were principalities, the judges of the dead and the living. There is no higher rank among the angels in our sphere. I returned Terentia's greeting, trying not to look as if I was waiting for my blindfold and cigarette. How can I serve you, masters? With the truth, said Camuel, but almost kindly. "These are great matters in which you have been caught up, Deloriel. Dangerous matters, and we wish to hear of them from your own lips." Yeah, and what would you know about lips, I wondered, since Camuel's form was as indistinct as a rain cloud. I'm not entirely stupid, though, so I only bowed my head. Of course. And so the Ephors asked, and I answered. I tried to tell the truth when I could. It makes keeping track of the lies easier, but there were just too damn many things I didn't dare mention, too many laws of heaven that I had stomped all over while trying to get to the bottom of the whole mess. They knew that my demon lover Kaz had given me information, but they definitely didn't know what else had happened between us, which was good because I was pretty sure fraternizing with the enemy was a capital offense in the angel business, and I had gone a lot farther than fraternizing. They also knew that my buddy and partner Sam Riley, aka Advocate Angel Samariel, had been secretly working for a group that hijacked souls belonging to either heaven or hell and offered them instead a third way, that both sides of the ancient struggle were pretty eager to obliterate. They also knew Sam had escaped, but luckily they hadn't found out it was because I'd let him go. They also didn't know that he had offered to take me with him to the Third Way's new minted afterworld. I still thought about that sometimes. As I think I said, I've never just stood up and lied to heaven before. I've kept many a not very angelic thought to myself, of course, but I always told the truth about what I was doing and whom I was doing it with. But the last couple of months had changed all that. Truth was no longer an option. If my bosses found out what I'd done, I'd be sentenced to the nastiest pits of hell, or, if I was lucky, I'd just have my memory wiped and start over again, another fledgling angel learning how to keep his robe clean and sing Hosanna. So I lied, and kept on lying. As for the last part, well, it's all in my report, which we have absorbed with interest, said Terentia. But we have called you here so you can relate your experiences again, and perhaps, with our help, discover details which were inadvertently left out of your report. How could a guy resist such thoughtfulness? Well, as I said, when the monster attacked me in the abandoned amusement park, Angel Samariel took advantage of the distraction to escape. I didn't see where he went. By the time the Galu was dead, there was no sign of him. Fighting the monstrous ancient demon, and almost being swallowed by it, had definitely happened, I promise you. It was the oops, Sam got away part that hadn't. Raziel's dark light grew darker for a moment, like a thunderstorm starting to roll. But both you and Angel Haraheliel were together after the creature of the pit was dead, or nearly so. He says he was struck by one of the creature's death throes, but before he was rendered senseless, he confronted Samariel. These conflicts confuse us. A silence fell between the boss angels. I had the disturbing sense of things flying past above my head, of conversations I couldn't hear but which would determine my fate whether I liked it or not. Haraheliel was the real angelic name of rookie advocate and company spy Clarence, and trying to make the kid's report jibe with my invented recollections was one of my major challenges. I'm sorry, Master, I said quickly. You're right, of course. When I said attacked, I meant the creature's last movements. I thought it was dead. It lay still for a long time, but then it stunned Angel Haraheliel with its leg and started to get up again. I fired my last bullets into it, and it finally stopped moving. I was praying. Ironic? No? That I was remembering the details right, or at least the details of the version I'd submitted to Heaven's auditors. I had been studying my report and Clarence's for days, like a panicked freshman in finals week. I've got a pretty good memory, but being here in the Enactaron would be enough to make Einstein put his fingers to his lips and go blah, 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 blah. Then when I looked up, Angel Haraheliel was unconscious, and Sam, Angel Samariel was gone. I was tempted to prattle on, re-emphasizing all the important points, but instead I clamped my mouth shut and waited. Again, the awesome, nerve-wracking silence. Moments only, but a moment in heaven can literally seem like hours. Another thing that has been puzzling me, Angel Deloriel, said Anaita in her sweet, childlike voice. How was it that you were able to defeat a creature of old night with nothing more than silver bullets? It seems strange that such a mighty enemy should be dispatched as easily as one of the adversary's foot soldiers. Because the silver I put into the monster at the end was more than just any old silver. It was a gift to me from Kaz, a tiny silver locket, the only precious object that remained from her life as a human woman. And it was given to me with love. I'm convinced of that. The fact that a monster from the depths of time had died from that fragile little bit of silver, but had laughed off all the earlier silver slugs, was one of the biggest reasons that I didn't believe what happened between Kaz and me had been mere infernal seduction. But I could no more admit that to the Ephors than I could claim that God himself came down in a fiery chariot and crushed the Galu beneath its wheels. I still don't know, I said as humbly as I could. I put quite a few silver bullets in it during the course of perhaps 2 hours. At the end, it seemed to be laboring, which was a lie. Until I used Kaz's locket, the thing had swallowed silver rounds like they were lemon drops. Perhaps if I had been breathing, I would have stopped to take a deep, deep breath because I had no good answer and I was just plain scared. I honestly don't know. Don't underestimate an angel of the Lord, said Kariel suddenly. He was talking so I could hear him, but he was clearly saying it for the benefit of his fellow Ephors. Angel Deloriel was trained as a member of Counter-Strike Unit Lyrae to resist the enemies of heaven, and those angels are as brave and tough a group as we have. I have fought many times beside our Counter-Strike units. If anyone could bring down a creature of such ancient, evil lineage, it would be a CU veteran. Isn't that right, Deloriel? I could have kissed him, I swear. I could have wrapped my arms around his fiery, beautiful awesomeness and planted one right on him. We do our best, sir. We always do our best. Exactly. Deloriel was a harp. The way Kariel said it, it seemed to roll and echo through the great council chamber. One of those courageous souls who defend the walls of heaven itself, even if the ones they protect do not always remember. That means something. So, was Kariel trying to get me off the hook simply because he didn't like to see the angelic equivalent of ex-military being run down by the bureaucrats? Or was there something else going on? Shit, who was I kidding? In heaven, there's always something else going on. Of course, noble Kariel, said Terentia, again speaking so I could hear. But this angel left the Lyrae, did he not? I couldn't figure out what was going on, and that scared me all over again. Why were the top brass arguing in front of me, a mere foot soldier? It didn't make sense. Deloriel left Counter-Strike because he was gravely wounded in a battle with Hell's forces. Kariel almost sounded defensive. And now he serves the will of the highest as a member of his holy advocates, said genderless Raziel in a voice like quiet music, defending the souls of the worthy from the lies and trickery of hell. Perhaps, Anaita replied, but it was one of those self-same advocates who conspired with members of the opposition to create this wretched third way, causing all the trouble in the first place. And while there is no doubt that Angel Deloriel has been a brave fighter and an effective advocate, no one could dispute the fact that he seems to attract trouble. It is true, said Raziel slowly, that there have been times since I created the advocacy when I wonder if we were asking too much of the elect. requiring them to take on earthly bodies, again, exposing them to all the temptations and despair that beset the living every day on earth. They fell into silent conversation again, which was just as well because I must have been gaping like someone had broken a bottle over my head. Raziel created the advocates? I had never heard that. In fact, I had never heard anything to suggest our existence came from anything less than a divine order from the highest himself. How important were these 5 angels? And why were they spending so much time with little Bobby Dollar? Then an idea came to me, stealing over me like a fog, sending chills up and down my non-corporeal form. Something was going on here, far beyond a fact-finding meeting, or even a meeting about something as important to these high angels as the renegades of the Third Way. Sam had told me that he'd been approached by a disguised angel that called itself Kephas, and everything about Kephas had suggested powers beyond that of heaven's rank and file, including the God glove it had given Sam, a device or power or whatever it was that had allowed him to do so many unexpected things. Might Kephas, the revolutionary behind the Third Way, be a high angel like this quintet of ephors? Or, even weirder and more disturbing, was Kephas one of the furious 5 themselves? The games they play in heaven are incredibly subtle, but they're still deadly. No, worse than deadly, because the loser's lot is an eternity bathing in fire. What was I caught up in? And how was I going to avoid becoming a Bobby-colored smear in the grinding gears of heavenly politics? Angel Deloriel, said Terentia suddenly, breaking into my thoughts so abruptly that I almost squeaked in terror. I'm glad I didn't, since angels usually don't squeak. Yes, mistress? We must consider all you have told us. We will speak to you again. Be ready for a summons. And just like that, it was all gone. The fiery ephors and the gleaming magnificence of the Enactoron's council chamber, and I was back in my bed, in my miserable apartment once more, back in my miserable, shivering human body. It was still dark outside, but I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be able to get back to sleep. Chapter 3, Coming Back. I can only look at 4 walls so long before I start to get a little crazy. It was worse the morning after my inquisition because almost everything I owned was still in boxes on the floor of my new apartment, and the paltry number of those boxes made me think about how little I had to show for my existence. I suppose one of God's chief servants should have been proud of such a sparse, monkish existence. If a crate of jazz and blues CDs and a couple of boxes of hot rod magazines interspersed with the occasional Playboy and Penthouse counts as monkish, but it just depressed me. If I'd been a happy little angel doing the work of heaven, it probably wouldn't have been that way, but I'd always felt that somehow there must be something more to my afterlife. Now that I woke up each day with a Kaz-shaped hole in me, I knew what I was missing, but that didn't mean I was ever going to have it. I'd sworn that I was going to get her back, and I'd really meant it. I still did, but the heat of my anger was less now that several weeks had passed, and I had begun to realize just how unlikely it was that I could make it happen. For one thing, Kaz was back in hell, and nobody just waltzes into hell any more than they walk into heaven without a reservation. In fact, you'd have a better chance of rolling a shopping cart into Fort Knox and helping yourself to gold ingots. Both heaven and hell are way off the grid, by which I mean certainly, almost certainly, not on our big old round physical earth. Even if I managed to sneak in, there would be the little matter of me being an angel. Conspicuous? Yeah, a bit. And last, but certainly not least, would be the fact that Kaz was currently the unwilling property of Eligor the Horseman, Grand Duke of Hades, who'd already demonstrated his intent to torture me for at least an eternity or two, as soon as he cleared a few other matters off his desk. I'm not sure even Cariel and an entire heavenly legion could manage to get Kaz away from him, so you can imagine the odds against me on my own. In fact, the whole project was really just a complicated, painful way of committing soul suicide. But, oh, my dear Lord, every morning that I woke up and Kaz wasn't with me, I ached. And every night I lay down by myself in that punky little room on Beach Street, and I thought about ways to get her back. But the one thing I could never imagine was an outcome where we were together, happy and sane. If I knew heaven, I wasn't going to hear anything from my inquisitors for a few days. One thing they've got plenty of up there is time. I wouldn't have been surprised to discover they were all still floating around that conference chamber, one-upping each other, and hadn't even started deliberating my fate. Just about the worst thing to do would have been to sit around my little studio apartment waiting for heaven to call, even if I wasn't already prone to maudlin Kaz thoughts. So I invented a few pressing errands to give me a reason to get dressed. I took a cab over to see Orban, the gunsmith. He's the one who built cannons for the Sultan to use at the siege of Constantinople a few hundred years back. Here's how that worked out. Sultan wins. Constantinople falls. Christendom is seriously hacked off with Orban. Because he knows he's never getting into heaven, he refuses to die, and still hasn't done it. That's how he tells it anyway, and I'm not inclined to argue with him, especially since the stuff he supplies has saved my skin and soul many times. Anyway, Orban also armors cars, and he still had my custom Matador in storage in his garage. And although I had enough money now to get it out of pawn, I was beginning to think that a gleaming topaz-colored muscle car might not be the best ride for a man developing such a large collection of enemies. What good was it changing apartments and then parking the amber Amigo out in front of it? Not that I was going to give that car up. I'd put too much money and sweat and spare time into it. But I was going to have to find something else for day-to-day use. In my business as an advocate angel, I drive a lot and at all hours. No way I was going to be sitting at bus stops at 3 a.m. hoping the number 11 crosstown would get me to somebody's bedside in time to be there when they died. Orban wasn't in the shop when I arrived, but one of his assistants, a bearded guy who looked like he would have felt comfortable with a parrot on his shoulder and his keel being hauled or something, recognized me and opened up the garage, a long building on the next pier over from Orban's gun factory. Most of the vehicles inside had been brought in for some kind of modification, usually shielding, but the owners had either gone broke or had really needed the shielding earlier, and Orban had been stuck with the rides they left behind. He sold a few, especially if the security work had been finished, and kept the rest to cannibalize for spare parts. The guy with the pirate beard wandered back to whatever instrument of destruction he had been working on, leaving me to walk along the row of grills, footsteps echoing from the stained concrete below my feet to the rounded aluminum roof. Most of the cars were huge, limos and old American luxury sedans, the ones Orban had more trouble selling than the Hummers and pimped-out SUVs today's drug dealers preferred. One of Orban's old classics, a Pontiac Bonneville, had been ripped up like tinfoil by the Galu, so I was in need of a new ride. I spent a few agonizing minutes yearning over a scratched-up but sound 1958 Biscayne that, with a little sanding and a new coat of paint, would have made me a very happy man. But it was just too damn interesting for my purposes. If I wanted interesting, I'd keep driving around in my Matador. Inconspicuous was what I needed, though it went against everything in my character. Down at the end, looking like the runt of the litter because of its size and pushed-in snout, was a 1969 Nova Supersport. The paint that remained was a faded coat of candy apple red, but I could cover that with a less conspicuous color. It was probably a hot little number in its day. The SS's had a standard 350-inch V8. The frame was basically okay, but it looked like it would be quite at home rusting away on blocks in the front yard of somebody's mobile home. Not bad for my purposes. I left a note for Orban asking what he wanted for the Supersport, then walked back from the salt piers by way of the freeway overpass, so that I'd worked up a pretty good appetite and killed an hour or so by the time I arrived at Oyster Bill's. It was a little weird to think I might never eat there with Sam again since we'd spent a lot of time there, but I also felt like I was honoring his memory. The truth was, I didn't know how to think about Sam and what had happened to him. When you know somebody as long as I've known Sam Riley, a.k.a. Advocate Angel Samario, when you've gotten drunk together, been in firefights together, and watched a few dozen human beings die in each other's company, you kind of figure you've seen everything that other person has to show. So when I found out he'd been working for Mystery Angel Kephas and the secret Third Way operation, essentially running a side game right on heaven's own turf under my nose and everyone else's, well, I still wasn't sure how it all jibed. The last time the two of us had talked, just before he stepped through a shimmering door to somewhere I'd never seen before, he seemed pretty much like the Sam I'd shared all those breakfasts with in this very restaurant, watching the tourists get their money lifted by waterfront locals, both legit and otherwise. But all that time, or at least the last couple of years, he'd been hiding the whole Third Way thing from me. It made a guy think. And to be honest, I really wasn't too fond of thinking right at the moment. Still, I missed Sam and his big old country face. I couldn't help wondering if we were going to see each other again, and what that would be like. After lunch, I manufactured a few more errands, dropping off a hamper full of laundry at Lavanderia Michoacan and picking up some connectors from Radio Shack so I could finally get my television hooked back up. Then I sloped on home, grabbing a couple of burritos I could microwave. The television thing took longer than it should have. The way the wall jack was laid out, I would have had to put my television right in the middle of the bed. So I had to go back to the shack for another reel of cable. When I got back again, I fixed myself a drink. Okay, maybe two. By the time I finished them, the sun had gone down and the television was the only light in the room. I heated a burrito and watched the Giants game until enough of the vodka buzz wore off that I began to look around at the walls, which seemed closer than they should have. I've had that feeling a lot, and I don't think it was just because my new apartment was even smaller than the last one. After a while, I wanted another drink, but instead of fixing one, I got up, put my shoes and coat on, and headed out to the Compasses, where at least I'd be drinking with other people. A time-tested excuse for not being an alcoholic. I didn't really want to go there, since I knew all my Advocate Angel buddies were going to ask me about my hearing with the epherate, but the idea of going to some other bar where I didn't know anyone was even more depressing. And I was pretty sure that if I didn't get out of the apartment, I'd wind up fully dressed and painfully hungover the next morning, lying in front of the television exposed to horrible people chatting away on some breakfast show, which I'm convinced is one of the torments of hell. There'd been a few too many mornings like that since I let Eligor take Kaz away. So I went to the Compasses. By the way, a brief thing here. I do apologize since we followed on so quickly from the previous book. Of course, we are now getting all the stuff that was meant to bring people up to speed like 2 years later when the next book came out. And unfortunately, you guys know a lot of this stuff already. I hope it's at least amusingly written enough that you can deal with it. So sorry about having to hear all these details again. The Compasses is an angel bar, the angel bar in downtown San Judas. It's in the old Alhambra Theater building near Beager Square, a former Masonic meeting hall. The Masons' insignia, the square and compasses, still hangs over the door. A lot of the place was recently torn up by a Sumerian demon. It was chasing me, as it happens, but although there were still signs of ongoing construction, the bar was more or less back to normal. The Compasses was predictably loud, with the usual suspects in residence, the whole sick choir, as we sometimes called ourselves. We'd even put it on softball shirts once, but dropped out of the local league when we found out we were actually expected to show up and play softball. Chico was behind the bar, looking his usual combination of Mexican biker and aloof Confucian scholar, fiddling with his mustache while deciding which of the guys singing off-key at the bar he was going to cut off first. The serenaders were led by Jimmy the Table, a portly fellow who liked to wear old-fashioned gangster suits and looked like he should be out helping Nathan Detroit find a place to hold his famous floating craps game. He waved to me when I went past, but he didn't stop singing, being well into the middle verses of Roll Me Over, a song that's always more fun to sing than to listen to. I didn't intend to do either. I had Chico get me a Stoli, and then I crept off to one of the back booths. For about 10 minutes, nobody noticed me, and I just sat and watched God's warriors at rest and play. Pretty horrifying sight, if I do say so myself, but good for some laughs. Of course, I couldn't stay that lucky very long. Sweetheart, large, bald, and fabulously angelic, spotted me and rolled over to give me a frighteningly detailed account of all the cheap punks and overdressed poseurs in the club he'd visited the previous night, and to quiz me on my latest trip through the pearly gates. And of course, a few minutes later, young Elvis showed up, and I had to tell it all over again, or at least the abbreviated and sanitized version I'd cobbled up for public consumption. Most of the choir didn't even know that Sam was gone. The official word was that he was on some kind of administrative leave, and although the rumors had been flying in the compasses ever since he disappeared, as far as I knew, nobody but Clarence and me knew what had really happened. Later in the evening, Monica came in with Teddy Nebraska, an angel I didn't know too well because he worked the other end of town and tended to hang out there too. Monica was relatively sober, or at least sober enough to remember that I had been kind of a shit to her lately, so after she got the bare bones of what had gone down with me and the bigwig angels, she floated off to find more entertaining company. This was an immense relief, even though I'd left Teddy Nebraska sitting in my booth making awkward chit-chat until he thought of an excuse to follow her, or at least get out of my morose vicinity. Monica Neighbor and I have history. She's a wonderful woman, or angel woman, but I've hardly dared talk to her since the thing with Kaz started. Not because it would be cheating on Monica. We've always been a lot more casual than that. But because she knows me well, and I'm scared to death she would sort of metaphorically sniff the scent of another woman on me. Normally, that wouldn't bother me. Many of my other relationships have twined in and out of my weird off and on thing with Monica. But if anyone in heaven found out about Kaz, there would be nothing left of me but a scorched hole in the sidewalk and the whiff of dispersing ozone. I decided I'd made a mistake showing up at the Compasses instead of just going to some ordinary bar. My fellow angels wanted to socialize, but what I really wanted to do was sit in stoic, self-pitying silence until I had enough of a buzz on to stagger home. I'd cursed my job for years, being roused at all hours of the day and night and sent skittering across Jude to take up the fight for somebody's immortal soul. But now I was beginning to realize how much I missed it. Being on administrative leave or whatever bureaucratic limbo I was inhabiting at the moment was too much like being a prisoner of my own mind. I needed distractions, but not the other people's problems kind. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not really that type of guy. I mean, I care about people. Really, I do. But to be honest, I'd rather not have to hear too much about them. I guess you're beginning to understand why I've never been one of heaven's model angels. I'd just paid my tab and was heading for the door when Walter Sanders came in. Walter looked like he'd had a couple of drinks or more himself, which wasn't all that common. I'd seen him nurse a single beer through a whole evening while others were downing them in wholesale quantities. He's one of the angels I like, a reserved fellow with a sharp, slightly bittersweet sense of humor. I'd often wondered if he had been English in his pre-angelic life. He recognized me and stopped in the doorway, swaying almost imperceptibly. Bobby D., I was hoping to find you here. Want to talk to you. Can I buy you a drink? To be honest, I think I've had enough, Walter. I was just on my way out. Okay, fine. He shook his head and smiled crookedly. I think I've probably had enough myself, and I don't really want to talk in here anyway. He looked around. Too many ears. I'll walk you out to your car. If you don't mind, we can chat for a few minutes in the parking lot. I don't have a car, I said. I'm walking. Then I'll walk with you, at least for a block or two. Again, the semi-apologetic smile. The air will do me good. We made our way out, ignoring Jimmy and the other guys up at the bar who were shocked to see anyone leaving before midnight. A few ordinary humans came out of the pizza place next door just as we passed, and there was a little jostling, but they moved along to the parking lot and we turned onto Walnut Street, which was quiet and empty, except for a homeless guy sitting huddled against the wall halfway down the block, asleep with his black hoodie pulled down over his head like a monk at prayer. "So, what's up?" I asked. "I'm just..." He stopped, thought about it for a few steps. "Sorry, I'm not even certain it's anything, and you've probably got enough to worry about, but it just seemed really strange." He trailed off again, this time to step over the homeless guy's skinny legs, which stuck halfway out onto the sidewalk. The guy had bare feet, thin and white, and even though it was spring, I didn't envy him, spending a night on the street without shoes. I was getting the tiniest bit impatient, wondering if Walter was going to walk all the way home with me before he figured out how to tell me whatever it was he wanted to tell me. "You were saying?" "Right," he laughed a little. "Okay, I suppose it's best if I just..." Perhaps because of drink, perhaps because he'd stepped on something, Walter lost his footing for a moment and bumped into me, just enough to throw us both a little off balance so that we stumbled toward the street side of the sidewalk. He put his hand up on my shoulder to steady himself, and just as he did so, he made a strange sound. Cha! A huff of air like a cat trying to offload a hairball. And then the stumble became a collapse, and he fell heavily against my legs, almost knocking me off the sidewalk. I spun around to keep my balance, and as I did, I found myself staring across Walter Sanders' slumped form at the homeless man, who was standing right behind us, bent in an insect-like crouch with something large, long, sharp, and gleaming clutched in one hand. "It waited and waited," the hooded figure said in a strange, creaky little voice, and for just a moment I had a glimpse of the face in the depth of the hood. Then a car came around the corner behind me and its headlights splashed him. He squirmed away from the glare. An instant later, he was sprinting away down Marshall Street, his bare feet slapping the pavement like raindrops on a window. I hesitated only a moment, trying to decide whether to chase him, but the guy was very fast, and within a couple of seconds he was around the corner and gone, headed toward Beager Square. I dropped to my knees to help Walter stand up, but he was limp and didn't respond when I asked him if he was hurt. I rolled him over. His shirt and coat were soaked in blood, purple beneath the streetlights, and it was pooling where he had lain, some of it already running over the curb and into the gutter like spilled paint. His face was white, his lips blue. The people in the car pulled to a stop beside us, so I begged them to call 911. Then I ran back to the compasses to get help. By the time I got back to Walter, the first SJPD squad car had arrived, and the fire department emergency van showed up only a minute or two later from their new station. It didn't make any difference, though. My angel co-worker had already stopped breathing. And although the paramedics did what they could to field dress him and bundle him quickly into their ambulance and head off toward Sequoia Emergency, lights flashing and siren moaning, it wasn't going to change anything. Walter Sanders, or at least the body he'd been given, was as dead as vaudeville. But as I stood there letting the shocked questions of the Compass's regulars wash over me, I was hardly even thinking about Walter. I assumed he'd be back maybe as soon as tomorrow, decanted into new flesh by the boys upstairs, and with a story to tell that would fascinate anyone who hadn't been around tonight. As it happened, I was wrong, but I wasn't to know that for a while. No, the reason I was standing there in the whirling red and blue strobes of the cop cars, waiting as witlessly to be questioned as any normal human victim of a normal human tragedy, was because I had recognized the thing that stabbed Walter, recognized the whispery voice and the momentary glimpse of tiny, misshapen teeth. I knew, without having seen it, what the wound just under Walter Sanders' ribs was going to look like. A four-pointed star, a puncture made by something more like a bayonet than any normal dagger. But even that wasn't what was bugging the shit out of me. Not only had I seen that creature before, I had been present when it died. Died the real death, the not coming back kind of death that only an immortal fears. And yet, it had come back. It had come back. And that is where we are stopping for tonight until next week. So let me just put a bookmark in there. All right, good. And so I will now bid you adieu and à bientôt and auf Wiedersehen and all kinds of other things. And I will see you all next week. Thank you so much for spending time with me. As always, it's a great pleasure to be able to spend time with you. I will be, as far as I know, I see of no reason why I won't. We are going out of the country at the end of May, but that's still a couple of weeks and more away. So I will let you know about that and what the length, the duration of my absence will be. But until that point, I will continue reading. So at least a couple of more weekends. So again, with that, I say thank you for joining me. Be good to yourself. Be good to those around you. Keep an eye on them, your loved ones especially. Everybody take care of everybody, and we will somehow get through all of this together. And I think that's the best thing to do, is to survive and hopefully thrive. Okay, take care. Good night, everybody. See you very soon. Cheers.